Hi, I want to continue talking about the square of opposition and a little bit more about categorical logic as a review. So I'm going to go ahead and turn back to this screen here, and this is showing the traditional square of opposition. And so, we were talking about how, these can kind of follow around. But all of this hinges upon what we call an existential assumption. And the existential assumption is that if you make a universal statement, that we now assume that there is something something that is particular that is true. And so, if I say all S are P, then I'm also making the assumption that there exists some S. Now, in a lot of ways, we accept that's true. If I say all my students are online students, then I think that it's natural that we assume that I actually have students, right? I mean, it wouldn't be the case that I don't have students if I'm making a statement like, all my students are this way. If you're talking to somebody at a party and they say that, you make that assumption. But at the same time, we also accept that there are theoretical categorical statements. Theoretical statements like all wars that are nuclear, all wars that are all wars that involve the use of nuclear weapons are wars that bring about devastation. Well, that is a statement that we accept may be true, but we also don't accept that some of the wars that there exists a war that has been nuclear in its fight. That obviously the United States has used a nuclear weapon, but it was not a war that was nuclear in nature. It was not a war that purely was based upon the use of those weapons. It was an exception in that war. And so what happens is we accept that, you can have a universally true statement, but that it doesn't actually exist in reality. Unicorns, saying something about that, saying something about mermaids, saying something about an extinct animal, that doesn't mean that there currently exists that. And so what happens is, because of that issue, we have come up with what they call the traditional square of opposition. And the traditional square of opposition, you'll notice if you turn in your book as well from page 64 for the one to the other one, you can also see, let me see, where's that? To page 72, you'll notice that they removed the X's on all of these. That there was an X here because there's no longer that universal assumption. We've just shaded the part that's not true. And so what happens is because of that, we are limited in our assumptions. Because this is true doesn't make this one true. So we remove the arrows that are at the side. And because of that, really the only thing we really can know for sure is that if all S are P, then if that's true, then we know that some S are not P cannot be true. These cannot be true simultaneously. These cannot be true simultaneously. So anytime that one's true, that one's false. Anytime this one's true, that one's false. Anytime this one's true, that one's false. So we know if one of them is true, the other one has to be false. This limits our ability to draw conclusions about what's true and false, but it also perhaps is more realistic in its pursuit. Now, what happens is you should, while you're doing the homework, I would recommend, you look back to these squares of oppositions considerably. Because what you'll find that, if you're doing these arguments, if we turn to like page 3.6a, page 68, number exercise 3.6a, it says all kayakers are amateur athletes. There, some sea kayakers are amateur athletes. Well, in the traditional square of opposition, we know that if this first premise, all sea kayakers are amateur athletes, is true, then we would know that it follows that some sea kayakers are amateur athletes. We would know that follows from the traditional square. From the modern square, we can't make that assumption, but from this one we can. So I would recommend while you're doing this, you keep these, and if you want to look at it in your book, you might make a copy. You might want to earmark these pages with like maybe a post-it note or something. But look back at those because those will be important as you make assumptions and how you follow the reasoning. But by doing that, we can determine if an argument is valid or not because, if that statement is true, then therefore some sea kayakers or amateur athletes has to be true. And so we can actually determine if the argument is valid or not, if it follows necessarily by looking at that traditional square. Now, the other thing that exists here, and I'm not as big of a fan of this as perhaps I think, other things. But I think it kind of gives you a little bit more familiarity with these concepts. And those are the concepts of what we call conversion, obversion, and, we have conversion, obversion, and some of the other operations, contraposition. And what these do, so there's conversion, obversion, and contraposition. If you turn in your book to page 81, and let me see if I can find it here in the lessons too. You have conversion, obversion, and contraposition. But if you look here, you take like all S or P. If you want to do the conversion, all conversion does is simply flip the S and P. It flips the subject and predicate. Obversion, on the other hand, changes it from keeps it a universal statement, but also what it does is it negates the predicate and changes the quantity, so it goes from all to no, and this becomes no S or P, and so then it also makes that negative, so it goes to no S or non-P, and so on and so forth. And what happens is we can use these to also tell us things about these arguments. But what happens is you can do all of these arguments. Conversion simply flips them. Obversion flips or leaves them in the same order, but changes the all to a no, or the or the other, and it also changes the predicate from a positive to a negative. So instead of it being all S or P, it becomes no S or non-P. Instead of no S or P, it becomes all S or non-P. Instead of some S or P, it says some S or not, changes the quality, changes it from positive to negative, and then makes the predicate negative. And then contraposition, what it does is it switches the predicate and the subject, but, I'm sorry, it doesn't switch the predicate. Oh, yeah, it does. It switches the subject and predicate, but then it negates both the subject and the predicate. And so what happens is all S or P becomes all non-P or non-S. And so these are the three main methods we can do for this. I'm going to stop this here just for time, and then I'll come back, because I don't want to have to break this up.